Thank you for joining Resilient Cyber. My name is Chris Hughes, and today I'm joined by Stuart Mitchell. Stuart, thanks for being here, man.
Chris, thanks for having me on. This is long overdue.
Yeah, I was gonna say we've been chatting for a long time about trying to get on the show, but you've been busy. I've been busy. A lot of events in the industry, a lot of things going on. So I'm so glad we got the chance to sync up. But for folks that don't already follow you, know what you're up to in the industry, can you tell us a bit about your background?
Yeah, so Stuart Mitchell. I live in New England, from old England. Live in New England, up in Connecticut, and I run a cybersecurity search firm. We're based across the US. Essentially, I've been recruiting in the cybersecurity space within the US for 10 years. Spent some time in New York, spent some time in California, and cultivated relationships on both coasts. And been fortunate enough to hire for. And we'll go into this, but some of the most amazing, interesting, difficult, fascinating types of company. And so have a really, really interesting and probably a little bit of a unique perspective on the cybersecurity hiring ecosystem as a whole.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I've been on the practitioner side for a couple decades, and I've interacted with recruiters. I still get outreach from recruiters, better for good or bad. And you're someone I've come across. I'm like, he knows what the hell he's talking about. Like your perspective has always been insightful for me. And I've just enjoyed your content. And I saw you make the leap. From an organized, established firm to kind of starting your own thing. And I'm curious, like, what made you make that decision? How has that experience been? I'm sure it hasn't been all sunshine and rainbows. What led you to do that, and how's it been so far?
Yeah, so I think, look, the first thing I'll say is the business I was with before, I had the most wonderful 5 years with those folks, some of the best memories of my life. So it certainly wasn't an easy decision. But you get to a certain age, I've started a family, and I kind of start to look at the things that are most important to me. And I think for me, I do, or at least I think I do, share a really unique relationship with the cybersecurity industry. And there's a few other recruiters that have this, but not many. And I really wanted to double down on that. And I think when I was working for a business who were more focused on growth and there's very different ways to approach the recruiting industry. And it felt like the time to do something in the way that I like to see the world and the way that I like to interact with people. And the further I went up the chain, the more my style was slightly different. And I didn't want to internally be sharing a different narrative because that would also be toxic to the company. So I think like after 5 years and some wonderful work that we did together and super grateful for what it meant for my career, it was time for me to build something under my own image. And I think, the more I think about it, the more I think about my legacy. And it's such a strange word to think about, but I don't want to be the biggest. I'm like not really focused on being the most profitable. Like obviously we're in it to make money, of course, but like I build this business for the cybersecurity industry, right? I build this for the people. And so far it's gone very well. And I will say, like, I am super grateful for the folks who have made this leap a lot easier for me. And by that, I mean the people in the cybersecurity community. We've been well received. People have been very wonderful to me and my team and very generous. And, we had a sensational first year. I think with the market was tough last year. Tech didn't do great, but we were, again, I have people that were reaching out and we supported on some wonderful hiring initiatives. And, one of our main USPs last year was really like, hey, we have this huge network of engineering and kind of tech caliber security engineers that you've never been able to see. And we can make those connections for you. So it was an interesting pivot. But we've been growing and growing and growing. Last quarter, I think, was the first hiccup where we probably didn't set out to achieve our metrics. And I think as a founder, like I'm a confident person, it shakes you a little bit. And so it's like, okay, well, let's just go back, remember why we're here, double down. And already Q3, we're in a good situation. Looking forward to get with everybody at Black Hat in Las Vegas. But I think if I was to stand back and assess my almost 2 years, I'd be very pleased of what we've achieved. And I'm excited. We have a great team, great people. And I wouldn't have it any other way. And I'm grateful that I took the crazy leap into entrepreneurship.
Yeah, I mean, as someone on the other side of, I have a cybersecurity services company, so I can relate with, the whole emotional roller coaster of the excitement, the disappointment, all of that, the pressure. You talked about, starting the firm to serve the industry. And, for better or worse, for recruiters, talent firms can have, a mixed reputation among practitioners and organizations. What do you think makes a good, talent recruitment firm? What differentiates you from kind of some of the other peers? And what are some things that, to really highlight, from your perspective?
So I think the first thing, which is one of our key pillars, is I'm a huge believer in Simon Sinek's The Infinite Game. You find with a lot of recruiters, they'll do security, then they'll probably follow the AI train, and they change, right? So really, they're only motivated by the here and now, right? They're here to get a deal done, and I think, look, that's traditionally what I find is it's not the individual recruiter's fault. It's the way that their team and company are looking at things, which is, hey, let's get deal over the line, revenue, let's get it in. Because we are in one space, we're very focused on people that we meet again. Look, I've been doing this for 10 years. I've seen people go from analysts to CISOs. I've worked with people. I've had to call people who haven't got jobs through me and say, hey, 2 years later, hey, I think we should look at this one. So how you treat people in those moments is so important, because I expect to call people again, right? I expect that I will run into people again. And so like the reality is that allows you to treat people in a very different way. And look, I think like if you look at what is successful, and look, in the short term, on the staffing side, people think they're maybe very successful on the hamster wheel, pushing deals through volume, and they'll get there. And look, it can work. Personally, I think it's a miserable existence. Like, I can't imagine having to reintroduce myself to every single person, annoy everyone, and then go and do it in a different like the concept is not great for me. But that single thing allows you to be good to everyone you come across. And because we're so singly focused, I think, look, am I an application security engineer? Absolutely not. Do I think that I have a very good understanding of security and the challenges people face, and I can unpick problems and, understand what, okay, well, if you're, here are some of the problems that you're going to have if you migrate to the cloud from a security perspective. Here's some of the things, okay, you want to get to FedRAMP by the end of the year. That's no easy feat, right? You can't do that with one contractor. Like, this is, so I think having an understanding and seeing situations so often allows me to actually help customers out versus like fill a seat, if that makes sense. And likewise on the candidate side, I have a pretty good idea of like where's a good place for them, even if it doesn't, even if it feels non-linear in the moment, and be able to unpick and explain why something might be like, okay, well, maybe you as a red team engineer, why this purple team role could be good longer term for you if you're looking at, you want to be into a leadership role, or you want to get on the enterprise side. Like, being able to have that historical data and share it with people is typically useful versus, hey, I'd like to get a deal done so that I can get a nice check.
Yeah, I mean, a few things you said that jumped out to me when you mentioned the infinite game. Some of the concepts and things that you're talking about there is, one is the nuance of developing competency, of understanding what organizational needs are, industry trends, professional career trajectory potential, and things like that just come with expertise and time and wisdom, and realizing that you're always learning, you're always growing, even as a recruiter, like you talked about. And then two is the trust factor, something you and I joked about offline. Is like, it takes a long time to build that network, to build that trust, to build that rapport, and you can lose it very fast by making short-term, short-sighted decisions. So I really like that perspective, and it resonates with me very well. Something you also talked about a little bit here is like some of the industry-wide trends. You talked about, how you had a great first year and different quarters and performance and things like that. When you look at the industry in the last, say, 24, 36 months, what do you see some of the trends are in the cybersecurity workforce industry? Obviously, we had the COVID situation, the boom of the remote workforce, now kind of the return to office situation for some Like, what are some trends you're seeing in terms of the dynamics between employers and employees and things like that?
Yeah, so I think you covered, it feels like 3 or 4 eras, and it's been like 4 years, right? It's crazy that like we're talking like the reality is there's not a great harmony between employers and employees at the minute, is the first thing that I would say. There is, look, I think because employers were exceptionally kind during the COVID years, because everybody, like that kind of post-COVID 21, 22 boom, as a on the employee side, people were exceptionally well taken care of financially, freedom wise, and probably pushed the needle a little bit far, which is where we are right now. Like, obviously you can see the TikTok trends and all that jazz of quiet quitting, or what, people working getting 5 W2s. Like, it was insane. And look, it is what it is. But I think the biggest trend right now is people don't want to go back to the office, but companies do want to have people back in office. Not every company, but again, my job and my job as a recruiter is to, I want to tell people that it's raining. I do not have the power to make it rain. And that's the reality of how I look at things. So people may not like the trends. But one of the biggest trends right now is there is a fairly large emphasis on return to office. Do I think this is I think we've come into this situation now, and you can see it a lot on LinkedIn, where it's all about like corporate control and this is just mean. And I think that's just like, the reality is businesses exist to serve their customers, turn a profit, and either take care of their shareholders or their investors. And that's why businesses exist, right? Like, let's not forget about that. Unless you're working for a not-for-profit or a government entity, 99% of us work for a company who exist to make money in whatever shape or form. And I think people forget about that. Businesses and CEOs and leaders are doing this because they think it's the right thing for the business. You can throw statistics either way, and depending on where you get your sources, you can get anything to back yourself up. But leaders are doing what they think is the best thing for their business, and that is the reality of the situation. There does seem a disconnect between folks who, have been remote and think they're doing a pretty good job, and so maybe got caught up in a riff. I feel for folks that moved to really remote areas. In truth, if people moved to Montana or Indiana, but they were getting in a tech job making $200,000-$400,000, and and then that doesn't work out, the reality sets in very quickly of, okay, well, if I work for a local business, I'm probably not going to get that compensation. So all of a sudden the ranch is a little bit intimidating. So I feel for those folks. But I think, look, the reality is 80+% of roles are some form of on-site at the moment. And that's LinkedIn data. I think it was 84%. The other trend I'll see is teams are lean right now. Teams are very lean. We went through this huge hiring wave back in 2021, 2022. Look, if you're a cybersecurity professional, you open your LinkedIn, you got 15 job offers. Like, it's nuts. And it was like an interesting scenario to be a recruiter, because it was kind of good, kind of not. Like, the power, it was a supply and demand situation that was at the other end of the spectrum. Right now, teams are lean. I'd say security leaders are pretty tired. And I've never felt everyone kind of want to make a change, but right now I don't know how much greener the grass is. I think that there's just an industry-wide fatigue because teams ran lean. And look, I get and I posted this on LinkedIn the other day. A lot of businesses had to go into like a hedgehog shell last year. There was a huge recession coming. Rates could not stop going up. And so, look, businesses at times have to protect cash, but you can't do that forever. People, I get like, hey, let's get in, let's bunker down for 6 months. We're 18 months, almost 2 years removed from these types of things, and the teams are still hunkering down. And they're like, okay, well, I'm going to get out, right? Like, I know that we were doing this in the short term, but businesses looking at that like, hey, we didn't get breached, security's probably fine. So the teams aren't growing, but leaders aren't able to get ahead of any initiatives. It almost feels like they're playing whack-a-mole with security issues.
Yeah, I mean, you see that a lot that's kind of an age-old problem of cybersecurity. It's like you're trying to prove a negative almost, like nothing bad happened, so we must be doing something right, or things are going great, and like maybe you just gotten lucky. Maybe there's a lot at play there. Basically, it's hard to prove. And then, as you point out, there's something to be said about the workforce and the burnout, the fatigue, the cognitive overload of just getting by with less for longer and longer. Eventually you burn people out, your good people move on. You do put yourself at more risk of having an incident. For example, people are just kind of not as on top of the game as they may have been previously, or the team dynamics have changed, et cetera. There's a lot of play there. When we talk about the cybersecurity workforce, it's often, when we talk about like an organization's ability to attract and retain talent, it's often kind of discussed painfully. We always hear the age-old cybersecurity workforce metrics about shortages, people struggling to attract and retain talent. But I feel like there's some responsibility on not just the workforce, but also the organizations. That we all know the story of like awful job descriptions that require more experience than even exist in a certain thing, or it's just a hodgepodge of every tech and every product and every, when you start working with organizations, what do you see and how do you kind of help them refine what they're looking for? Sometimes it feels like they don't know what they're looking for, or they can't really communicate it well, for example.
Yeah, and I think sometimes I always try and like look at how, like, where the heck these like nuts job descriptions come from, right? So it's like, and it's normally one of two situations historically. One is like they've never hired a security person, and they go to Google or whatever, and they're like, "What should a security person do?" And I can almost picture it in my head, like an executive team sat around the room, and oh yeah, they should manage permissions. Oh yeah, we need this compliance thing. Oh yeah, like, and if they could do some penetration testing, that's pretty good as well. And I could just see them like almost sat around the whiteboard or with like post-it notes, just writing it down, and then they vomit it into a job description. The other is organizations sometimes have a unicorn internally who knows everything about their system, right? Like, let's say you have someone for 5 or 10 years, they came from IT or whatever, they came from, like, they're an intern, and they, like, every business thinks they have like common tech, but like by the time you get out of like 50 people, everything is so unique, and environments are very unique. And so they look at it and they're like, okay, well, this is our stack, this is our company security problems. And we had Jill, or we had Pradeep, or we had Hannah, or we had Terry, and they knew all of these things. Let's replace them. And it's like, okay, well, they were so intimately involved with what you had, and sure, like maybe they were making 150K, so you want to hire them for 150K, but the reality is they got headhunted for 200 because that's what they're worth. And now you want to pay that person 150K again, but they left because they were underpaid. And these are like very common. And I think people go to, they go to LinkedIn and there is uproar. They're like, oh, this is a 250K job or whatever. And it's like, well, sometimes they've had it, right? So they're like, okay, well, if I pay $5 for a car wash, and I've been paying $5 for a car wash for 5 years, why are you charging $20? Like, it doesn't make sense. The reality is it does. And maybe you got lucky, or like people didn't realize they were undercharging, or the car wash shut down because it wasn't making any money, but you want to pay $5 and you're a little bit annoyed about it. And I think so that happens a lot. And then the other thing is, look, we've experienced more rifts than I've ever seen in the cybersecurity system in the last 18 months. Some security adjacent. But in the cybersecurity space itself, I think employers are looking at this going, all right, well, we're like, historically, we were lucky to get anyone through the door, and we were pretty happy about it. Like, now let's sharpen the pitchforks a little bit and just see what we can get. Let's see how far we can push this. And if someone ticks 90% of the box, and they've been on the bench for 3 months, like, maybe they'll take this. And look, there's a supply and demand issue here. And look, I think businesses, again, they're looking at it this way. The reality is, some people might think this is quite harsh. When people had 10 job offers 2 years ago, they were looking at it the other way, right? Like, hey, well, these guys are offering me 270, so let me see if I can get these guys to pay 300. So it is like, I think people look at it things through extremes. It's just the market, and it is a market, right? And sometimes it swings this way, sometimes it swings this way, and sometimes there's an equilibrium. But the reality is, right now, there are folks out of work, and it pushes almost the stock price down, or security price, and stock is a bit lower than it was a few years ago. And that's why businesses are trying to take advantage of the market, and look, in the expectation that pendulum flows again, they know they'll have to get their checkbooks out. And there's never a harmony where the supply and the demand and things fit. It tends to just go one way or the other. And that's just the nature of the beast.
Yeah, I mean, a simple supply and demand dynamics at play among the workforce. As you talked about, like, previously the employees were in a position of, I won't say power, but they had, the ability to kind of demand remote workforce, demand higher compensation, more comfortable, compensation packages, et cetera. And now their dynamics have shifted in many regards. And I think there's some nuance to that too, that you talked about, of like, well, I paid this at this point, why am I paying this now? It's like, well, much like inflation, this sounds like a weird analogy, but in my mind, the cost of that individual doesn't stay the same. If they're progressing professionally, they're learning, they're developing, they're becoming more competent, more capable, they are worth now more in this time than they were, say, 5 years ago. They've become more of a competent professional. And maybe they're not a fit for your organization. Maybe the budget doesn't allow it, whatever the case is, they're going to move on and find something different. But that's another thing at play too. And something I wanted to ask you, when we talk about the workforce, it often, we always hear about the shortages, and I know you focus on like niche high-end talent a lot of times, in terms of engineering and security leadership and such. But it seems like one of the biggest gaps is at the entry level of the career field, and I don't know if you spend much time focusing on that, or I'm sure you at least pay attention to it. It seems like we need more junior entry level folks, but the requirements, things like that to get into the career field are so daunting and nearly impossible in some cases that we can't address this underlying shortage at that level. What do you think on that front?
Yeah, it's really, and so many people have so many different opinions on this, by the way. You'll go as far as people saying that it shouldn't be an entry level job, right? Like that's one end of the ecosystem. It's hard, right? Because I feel for folks that feel like they've been sold a dream. Like this is you're a walking 6-figure salary, life is going to be great as long as you go and get your CISSP or whatever, Security Plus, or do this boot camp or whatever. And I think there has been some snake oil salespeople that have profited off people's desire because it seemed like the streets are paved with gold. And there's some wonderful statistics that I feel like are 7 years old, and it's always 3.5 million unfilled jobs. It has been since I had hair. So it's like, and you look at the motives of these folks. Look, the reality is there's a few things. There are not many companies who hire entry-level security talent, rightly or wrongly, and I can understand both sides of the organization, like sides of the argument, but that just turns people off. And then where do they go? And then the very best people are going to leave because they can't get in. I always found historically that services firms were really wonderful at curating talent. You get exposure to many different projects, you get a wide lens. Some days you may be running through risk and compliance, you're doing penetration testing, you're doing network security. And I've always found it a wonderful place to hone people's careers because you get a look at everything. And I think, those businesses are better geared to hiring and coaching entry-level talent. I look at already understaffed, hired security leaders, and, these folks require care and attention. And, if you're a billable resource, you get a little bit more runway in a services firm, right? If you're at a Deloitte, if you're at a Booz Allen or a boutique play, there's a little bit more runway because you're making profit for the business. There's a little bit more investment in your development. If you're a tired security leader who, already is understaffed and heads down and playing the role of a security engineer every day, and then focusing on the development of somebody, which is I don't want to say it's a full-time job because that's, I think, underselling, but it's a lot of work, right? For somebody who's never been, and the stakes are high, right? Like it's not, most of the real world security issues not happening in a sandbox. It's not, there's no training wheels, right? When you're in, you're in. And so, and look, I think there's plenty of people that want to be in the industry for all the right reasons. There's plenty of people that want to be in this industry because they think it's a good paycheck as well. And there's a friend of mine who's a CEO of another security consultancy, and his advice is always like, don't get into security for the money. Like there are plenty of other things that are easier. Like, if you want to money, like he's like, sell charging station, like sell portable chargers at a security company. He's like, there's so many other easier ways to make money than security. But some people, it's either a calling or a passion. And I think those are the people that thrive, because on the bad days, either when you're between work or you're working on an incident at 3 a.m. and you're like, why the heck am I putting up for this? If it's just for a paycheck, there's so many different ways to make money. And I think we probably will see a little bit of a thinning out of folks trying to get into the industry, because I think there was a world where it was like, hey, well, I was going to get 120K as an entry level, so like that was it. And I think it takes persistence, and folks are still getting in. And some people are getting in through the side door as well. They're working in software engineering, they're working on IT admin, or they're taking a role that is, maybe for a less, maybe they wanted to go to Google and they end up running IT and security at like a community college, but they're getting in. There is more than one way to get in the door. And I think the people who are passionate about this will find a way, because that, especially like, you're a hacker, right? I know it's a cheesy terminology and whatever, but if your job is to find a way in, and the front door, like everyone's trying to get in the front door right now and it's squeezing out and the chances are lower. if you can find ways through the side door or consulting or whatever, but it's still very broken. It is like the top down is there is a problem here, and fine for now. In 5 years, when the stakes get even higher and people are leaving our industry, and folks decided that AI was shinier, or they decided to be anything but security, and we're going to be understaffed again. The people who are towards the back end leave, all of a sudden we have the same problem again. So we're very much band-aiding our problems right now, and on what is a pretty deep wound.
Yeah, a lot of things you said there actually really resonate with me. Is it goes back to the infinite game comment you made earlier. Like cybersecurity, I've been doing this roughly 20 years, and like every day I feel like I just have so much I still need to learn. Like there's just so much to learn, and it changes all the time. So you can't come to this career field and just do it for the money. Think that I'm just going to jump in. I get this one certification, this one qualification, or I learn this one product or technology. I'm set. I'll be good. No, it doesn't work like that. Things are always changing and evolving, whether it's products and ways that we do things in security, or the threat landscape, the way that attackers are operating and the way organizations need to defend themselves. That's always changing. So you always need to be willing and passionate enough to go out and learn and do the hard work of learning and developing yourself. And then the social engineering aspect, you talked about hacking into the career field. I really like that aspect because it's true. People are going to look at this and say, how can I get in adjacently if it's not directly? What can I do to set myself apart from my peers? And then, you talked about the comment of it not being an entry-level job, in some people's perspective. I actually agree with that in some ways. I started off on the help desk and then system administration, then networking, and but all of those things actually lay a foundation of being in security, because now you understand how the hell things work. Like it's hard to secure stuff when you really don't understand how it works or how the business uses it, how it powers the business, how things work technically. If you just jump straight to security, sometimes having that foundation in broader technology, IT, et cetera, can be really beneficial as well, in my opinion.
I would suggest that one of the best alumni programs for cybersecurity is the Apple Geek Squad. Like there are so many people that I've worked with that were doing it in college. I think it's the Apple Repair and the Best Buy Geek Squad, or whatever it is, Apple Genius and Best Buy Geek Squad. There are so many people who did that during college or did that straight out of school and have found their way to cybersecurity. Again, it's help desk adjacent, it's troubleshooting, and it's talking to customers, right? And so it's people ask me like, oh, what's the best college or whatever, and I'm like, that's the alumni I see most on resumes as Apple Genius and Best Buy Geek Squad. There's so many people that did that. It's so fascinating.
Yeah, it's funny you said that, because it really does. It teaches you like technical troubleshooting, obviously, which is good. That that way of thinking through things as you advance through your career and troubleshoot problems, but also the communications, the customer intimacy and relationship aspect of things, the soft skills as they call them. You always hear people quip like, the value of working in retail or in the restaurant industry for those reasons. Same thing in working in like, the roles you're talking about, working with customers and troubleshooting problems. And, those things are so valuable as you advance through your career. I wanted to ask you too, you talked about the shift in the market dynamics, right? The change to the situation for employees, as you interact with folks and they're seeking that dream job, that dream role, they want to go to the next level in their career field or whatever, they want to work for a certain organization. What are some of the common qualities, characteristics, or tactics that you see, people employing that are successful in making that happen, and how can others kind of replicate that?
Yeah, so I think that we just touched on it, right? Like there are so many people who live in a security bubble, right? They're excellent in security, but they don't know how to play well with other, and this is like top to bottom, right? And I think this is something that, like, if you can become important to other people in your business that are not your security team, and not be, oh, Rick is coming down and he's going to ruin the fun, or like, oh, I got to go talk to the security guy, like crying out loud. Like, I think the ability to play well and communicate outside, you got to be bilingual almost, right? Like no one knows what you're talking about when they're talking about clearing caches or like, patching. Like they don't know, right? Like, and some do, but like the reality is 80% of the workforce has no idea what you're talking about. You think you're speaking ABCs. The reality is you're speaking hieroglyphics to folks, and then there's this barrier where you become like people don't realize they're becoming condescending. I have candidates sometimes, and honestly, it's entry level folks, and they're telling me like what a SOC. I'm like, look, like I know, And I was like, if I was on the other end of a phone and you were helping me with an incident or something, I wouldn't be super happy about this, because it's like it's a little patronizing. And so like that ability to communicate on a human to human level is important. Second point that works is like that is so important is that like strive to be current and be like the continuous education piece. Just because you were good 3 years ago, like actually like the technology or whatever, like you could get left behind real quick. This industry is 5 years ago, like everyone was focused on the blockchain and that was the hottest thing. And the reality is like I don't know that any security programs are focused on this. And like everything changes and becomes useful. 3 years ago, an understanding of AI compliance didn't exist, right? Like, okay, what is now? I'm sure if you understand that, like you are valuable and interesting to an organization who has their whole team pushing their source code to ChatGPT. Like the market moves, and look, you can be really, really good and stick on one thing and stick around forever. And look, my father worked in tech. He was like the longest serving Tivoli storage management database guy, because everyone left and he was like, okay, well, I'll make my value being last man standing. But the reality is like, that's a dangerous play, right? That is a dangerous play. And it's, my dad actually didn't have the passion for technology. So he didn't want he was like, I'm here to get paid and retire early. And so, you need to be continuously studying and evolving, because you will get left behind really quickly. Like even if you were good 2 years ago and you kind of coasted for a bit, you're getting beat now. And I think there's this other thought process, and I use like sports analogies here, but like people are so obsessed with their years of experience, but like there are rookies that are better than veterans in the NBA and in the NFL and the NHL. Like just because you've been like, some people want it more than you. Some people are like naturally better than you, and that's just going to be part of the world. Some people are ready for the big game more. Some people communicate better. And so just because you've been doing it for longer, you may have regressed. Like, and it's the same in my industry. Just like there's so many people in my industry, and I'm like, yeah, used to be good, right? And they rest on their laurels, and they're not continuously learning and educating and looking at new ways of outreach. And so that strive to stay current. And then the third thing that I think is such an important factor in the people that get like the best jobs ever, by the way, like some of the most awesome searches that are working on, they have humility, right? And there is this like, and like I would say like there's folks who are very capable, right? But sometimes like you either want to be the hero every time, which is not, that is not like, sometimes being the hero is a wonderful thing, right? You fix something, you change something, like you find a vulnerability and it's like, holy shit. Some people are more interested, it's like a sports player being more interested in the stats and the team winning. There are people in our industry like that, and all they care about is their own individual pursuit and not the team. Being a team player, working on the collective, these are the folks who are getting paid handsomely because there's a collective goal, and they're, there's no, that's not my job. There's no, hey, I don't do that. Like if you think something is like, that's not my job, you start a company, there's a saying that you need to clean toilets if you think that anyone else is ever going to do it for you. And the reality is in cybersecurity, if you get on your high horse and say, hey, well, I don't do that anymore, you're capped, right? And you're going to be cut, like, and people aren't going to want to work with you. You might stick around because they need you for a bit, but like you're gonna top out. Whereas you get better by saying, hey, like never done this before. I've never really spent any time in Okta. Let's dive in. Like heck yeah, like that's the mindset. And that kind of goes back to learning, but like the ability to say, hey, I don't know, like let's dive in together. Like that, they're the people who get it, and they're the people who are going to move forward and have like decorated careers, get what they want. These are the people that get the high salaries or the remote work or whatever. Like if you're pushy and not a team player, like it's hard to then dictate like, okay, but these are my terms if I'm going to be this be all and end all person to you.
Yeah, what you're saying there really highlights just how well you understand the nuance of the career field and the actual practitioner perspective, in my opinion, is like, because in my experience, the people who do have the most success, rise through the ranks and get the roles they want and things like that, are admired by their organizations and valued, is the people who go beyond the team themselves, right? They go broader than even the security team. they're reaching across the organization. They're building relationship with their business and engineering and development peers. They're helping solve problems. They're not just kind of shoving, throwing things over the fence and saying, hey, you guys figure this out. You go sort this out. This is for you guys to resolve or remediate or whatever the case is. And not only that, but they're more effective now because they understand how the organization operates, how the business functions, what they're focused on, what their incentives are. All those kind of things really value or benefit you from a practitioner perspective and will benefit you throughout your career, in my opinion, in my experience. I wanted to ask you too, we talked a lot, from the employee perspective of how to go about, really positioning yourself well and, getting where you want to go. From the organizational perspective, if you're out there trying to recruit and retain this top end, these type of folks, what can you do to position yourself well as an organization, whether it's how you market your roles, how you kind of brand your organization, how you're communicating with the industry, how you treat people? Like, what are some things that you want to emphasize there?
Yeah, this is useful because I just put together a guide on this because I think a lot of people miss it. A lot of people really don't know how to hire in this space. And I think, the way I look at it is there's 5 key messages that I'm looking. And one is like, know what we went on the bad job description, but know the solution that you're trying to fix, right? Like the reality is like, hey, if we're a really early stage organization and it's basic cyber hygiene, like we know that. So we don't need somebody who's been software engineering for 8 years or whatever. We need a security generalist. Hey, if we have a compliance deadline that we need to hit, let's make this like super focus on, if it's a health, like HIPAA and they've done this before, why are we throwing in that they need to be deep in Palo Alto and whatever? So knowing exactly the problem that you're trying to fix versus, hey, we need a security person. The second is then to articulate that very well. I ran a workshop, it feels like it was 2 weeks ago, but it was like 2 or 3 years ago with Renana, who does a lot of hiring for PayPal. And she's like, my job descriptions, I need 3 things. I always need 3 things, right? Above and beyond like good communicator, team player. She's like, I boil it down to, hey, here are the 3 things that I really need to see. And I think like that is so important to be punchy and kind of like the reality is like, do we need 17 things? Probably not. Then you need to engage with the right recruiter, whether that's internally or externally, that can articulate the vision for your security team, the brand, the role, the career journey. Because look, if you want the very best people, right? Like most people are happy-ish. Some people are very happy. Some people it's about timing. But you need to articulate a vision that is going to make perfect, very clear sense to them, and ultimately make them want to leave a situation where they're probably fairly comfortable, right? So you need to articulate that vision. You need to have that married up by your recruiters, and you need to have a clear target of who you're going at. Like I again, being in the industry a long time, like I know that someone at so-and-so company is not going to be a fit for X or Y, might have all the right keywords and all the job descriptions, but like, I know that team makes, $500,000 and this is too hard. Like right. And it waters down your brand. Or, hey, I know this team is like if I hit up a bunch of guys from Wiz this week, I look like an idiot, right? I get a huge acquisition offer. Like, oh yeah, sure, Stu, that sounds great. Like, no, thank you. So I think like understanding that, because there's some muddying that you can do if you don't understand the nuances of your industry, and your brand can, particularly if you're a cybersecurity company, right? You look naive or a big hirer. Then the final piece is taking them on a very, very clear journey in terms of what the processes look like. Processes have been drawn out, like security teams. TA teams have been really understaffed for a while. And you can see it publicly. People are going on like, hey, we'll have an interview. Sure, we'll get back to you in a couple of weeks. Then we'll bring you in. And then maybe there's one more call. And then they don't have a clear vision of what a good process looks like. Candidates either lose interest. They get, if they're active, they get snapped up. But even if they're not active, right? Like if you order something and then you forget about it, and then 2 weeks they call back and say, oh yeah, I forgot about these. Like I'm not as excited about them anymore because it took 2-3 weeks to come through. Like Amazon, I want it tomorrow, right? Like I'm excited. So momentum, I don't think there's a prescription level of steps. You can, a 3-step process can take 2 months. You can do a 5-step process in a week if you're all in on it. And then the last one is like a tidbit is if you're a security leader, you should always in your head be hiring, even if you're not hiring, right? If you're not, again, like we all have personal commitments or whatever, but like if you hack a summer camp, go to your local B-sides, spend some time involved in the community, or, be public on LinkedIn, you should have that mindset of like, I would love it if people didn't have communities, but the best security leaders I know never need to call me, because it's like, hey, I'm going to, I've always wanted to hire this person, this identity management leader. I finally got something for them. We've been speaking once a year for 4 years, and I finally got them. Those people are amazing. And those are the people that, like, it's a great trait as a leader when actually you have a ready made network of people that want to come and solve problems with you. And that's another thing. Like, if you're looking, if you're a future leader right now, think about the types of people that are going to make your organization great, and get those ducks in a row now, because it is just such a wonderful thing when you get to bring people in, and you see people that follow their leaders, which is great. But even those folks that, like, hey, we never had, we were a huge AWS shop. I finally joined a place. I'm going to need a Microsoft program. I've been speaking to this guy at Microsoft for 10 years, and I've always wanted to hire him. It just didn't make sense. Things like that, where you have that mindset of, like, I think one day we'll work together. That is just the best thing that you can ever do as an employer.
Yeah, you dropped out so many gems right there. It made me laugh when you said, I wish people didn't have a community, because it is true. The people that are out there building a robust network of peers in their network, engaging with the community, being at events, building that relationship, they often don't need to rely on a recruiter because they already have that network of folks that make them resilient when something does happen. They have this group of people they can reach out to, let them know what's going on. They can help them land somewhere on their feet and so on. But I really like the perspective of advocating for their organizations to get involved with those communities, because that's where they're going to build those same relationships, and people will start to respect the organization, know what they're up to, what they're working on, what some of their security initiatives and vision is, et cetera, and then make it easy to recruit from the community. And then also the aspect about, the hiring process is such an astute one, because, we all know that we've felt the pain of, not being called back, not having a follow-up, not having at least an understanding of what went wrong or why it didn't work out, or why it took 3 months to hear back, or whatever the case is. So super valid advice for organizations trying to hire talent, and for folks looking to land on their feet or get that dream role that they're after, and so on. I always ask a question of the guests. The last question I always ask is, what does the term cyber resiliency mean to you? And since we've talked, both from the employee perspective as well as the organizational perspective, you can come at that, from an individual perspective, from an organizational perspective, however you want to tackle it.
Yeah, look, I think it's a timely question, because I think the overall mood in the cybersecurity community is a little low right now. I look across the board, there's some deflated, tired people. Look, sometimes you have to endure, and the night will be darker before the dawn. And look, a lot of people are going through the same problems as you. Sometimes there is time to hunker down. I think if there are frustrations, this is something that I learned in my career as well. Like, emotion is never your friend during frustrations. And I can see tired, annoyed people speak publicly on LinkedIn. People are speaking publicly on X. And there are, by no means am I trying to sound condescending, there are better ways to vent frustrations that can get to more productive outcomes. I have made wrong moves in my career out of frustration. I had a wonderful boss where I worked previously who helped me understand my frustration, and B, use them to my advantage by being able to articulate them. And I think if we're a community, if we can be resilient and use the frustrations collectively in a positive way, great. I think lashing out and saying no one cares, like we're just kicked in a room, and people should be paying me X and whatever, in the kind of wake of emotion, I don't see the positive outcome. I would love to, but I think there is creative ways that folks can share experience with. This is an awesome community. That's the main reason I stick around, is like 95% of the people in this are genuinely really, really good people. Leave the 5% very deliberately. I'd love to say 100. There's not everyone is great, but like people as a community will help you and support you and do what they can to move things forward. But I think it is a time to be resilient. There will be times where the gold taps turn on and things are great. You have the big teams and the great moments together. And then I think there is remember why you got into this. Cause if you're having a tough time, I think it's really easy to forget about where you come from and why you got into this. I think having those moments to reflect of hey, we, this is where I want it. 5 years ago is where I wanted to be. Like, this is exactly how I dreamed it up. And yeah, maybe you accelerated things and things have been better, but I think have a look through a wider lens. And I think a lot of people maybe taking for granted a little bit what they have right now. And so I think like that resilience of like, hey, things will push on, and the best way to do it is focus and channel positive energy. I'm not a mega spiritual person, so I'm not saying that like out of a place of huge spirituality, but like anything that you are frustrated about, there are more positive ways, you know, if you are resilient, to push those into positive outcomes.
Yeah, I agree with that. And, you know, I think that there's something to be said about the concepts we often talk about, like disaster recovery, you know,
Mhm.
continuity, resiliency in our personal life, our professional life, just like there is in our digital systems. So that said, Stuart, we run the gamut of, you know, the workforce trends, you know, launching your own firm, hamptonnorth.com. Definitely check it out. I've followed Stuart for quite a while and really respect his perspectives. You can tell he knows what the hell he's talking about. He's been in this industry. He's learned a lot. He's a very valuable asset for people looking to find that dream role or organizations looking for top tier talent. So hamptonnorth.com, definitely check it out. And Stuart, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Chris. Ton of fun.
Definitely.